welcome everyone to our electronic plan review Bluebeam training for applicants and customers. Our trainer today is Troy Barbu from AECOM. AECOM is our technical advisor that we've been working with on our Bluebeam and electronic plan review build out. And they've been helping us and sharing best practices from installations that they've rolled out in California, including at DSA. So today's training will cover entry points for an electronic application, building application, the key attributes of a well-formatted set of plans, primary information you need to know to navigate our review process in Bluebeam, and procedures for any customers that do not have a Bluebeam license or are an Apple Mac user. This training will not cover any department-specific information around timeframes. So we will not be discussing how long it takes to review an application or a set of plans. Those questions can be sent to the Permit Center at sfgov.org, and we can work with you offline on information about timeframes or any details about a specific project. But today is really to help everyone understand what our EPR process is, how we're using Bluebeam, and what you can do to have a successful project go through our process. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Troy Barbu, our trainer for today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started here. And one of the very first places I'd like to start is to speak about the resources that are available for all of you. I am here on sf.gov. So again, not any special website, just sf.gov, the same place all of you can go out. And of course, the reason we're here is we're looking to get a building permit. That's what today's training is going to be covering. We're going to be talking about building permits, how to essentially streamline that process, because the reason we're all here in a lot of cases is to get our building permit, and in some cases we're looking to get that as fast as possible. And so some of what I'm going to take you through today, what we're going to cover, is going to talk about that process and how that process can be as efficient as possible. As I'm looking in the building permits page, you can see I scroll down, and when I scroll down, there's a section here called Electronic Plan Review. So that is one resource, which we'll cover in just a second, but I want to keep scrolling because if I go a little further down, there's another Electronic Plan Review resources page. Let me open that. And in the Electronic Plan Review resources page, what you can see is, in addition, there's going to be training information here for you. There's going to be additional information on how to prepare your docs, how to submit your information. But if I keep scrolling down, you're going to see a lot of documents that are related to electronic plan review. And so as you're looking at this training today, as you're viewing everything that I show you, by far the most commonly asked question that we typically get is, where can I find this information? Where can I find this procedure that you're showing me? Where can I find this user guide that you're showing me? The answer to those questions is here inside of the Electronic Plan Review resources page. So let me just get you there one more time. I'm going to start again at sf.gov, and from sf.gov, you're going to building, you're coming to building permits, and you're scrolling down inside of building permits until you either reach the resources for electronic plan review, or up here a little higher up, the electronic plan review itself. So here in this section, you can read about submitting your plans. Again, we'll open up one of these tabs and take a look at that here in a minute. And also about where to find the back check page, which we're going to talk about as part of the submission that you're going to be submitting in to the City of San Francisco. So overall, you can learn about this process. You have all the resources. All of them are available to you here online. What we're going to do next is we're going to actually start to talk about Bluebeam. And as Rebecca mentioned, we want you to chat in your questions if you have them, but try to limit your questions to the electronic plan review process as opposed to other workflows related to building inspection, planning, etc. I'm going to start to show you some of Bluebeam and some of the account setup. Before I get to that, just note a couple of things. One is this class is not really a Bluebeam class necessarily. It's more about workflow related to the submission process. So if you're looking for general training videos about how to use Bluebeam, how to navigate within Bluebeam, and how to use some of Studio's tools and everything, a lot of that will be found inside of Bluebeam's website itself. So if you go to support.bluebeam.com and look up the training videos, you can learn all about how to use Bluebeam. That's not really why we're here today. We're more focused on the workflow portion. One thing I will note is that there is a training video here for electronic plan review. Oops, sorry, make that just a little bit smaller here. There we go. So there is a YouTube page that the City of San Francisco has, the Permit Center has available to you. And within that YouTube page, we are going to be posting videos, and you can see as you go through these videos, they have chapter links. So as I'm covering some of these topics today, when these videos are available, you'll be able to come in here, and if you want to refresh yourself on how to flatten the document or add that back check page, you can skip right to the hyperlinks section of the training video and have a good understanding on where to find it. So let's now talk a little bit about some of Bluebeam and some of how we're going to be setting everything up. I'm going to get you started with an account setup first. And in order to set you up with an account, I want to talk about Bluebeam's two main components inside of Bluebeam Studio. So I'm going to go ahead and sign out here. And as I go through these, as you're looking at Bluebeam on your computer, I just want you to note one thing, and that is that as I'm showing you buttons here, like for example, we're going to be focusing on this Studio button, don't anticipate that this button is necessarily going to be in the same location on your screen as it is on mine. So for example, on mine, it's up in the upper corner, but for yours, it may be on the left side. It may be somewhere else. It may not even be appearing. You may need to even click and show it to get to the Studio button. But the reality is that as I'm showing you these buttons, just look at what the buttons look like rather than trying to figure out exactly where I'm clicking on my screen. So for this, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Bluebeam Studio. Bluebeam Studio has two main components. One is Bluebeam Projects, which is a repository for all the documents related to the project. And where we're going to focus on today is the Bluebeam Studio session. So the Bluebeam Studio session, that is where the review takes place. And when thinking about this workflow, what happens is the document is submitted. It's placed into a Bluebeam Studio session where the reviewers from the City and County of San Francisco, where all those reviewers come in and perform their review. Once they've completed their review, we'll ask you, the applicant, to join into the Bluebeam Studio session. And from that point on, you will be interacting with the reviewers and the review team using the Bluebeam Studio session. You will even be uploading, if necessary, your subsequent submissions directly from your computer directly into the Bluebeam Studio session. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but let's go ahead and get started with Bluebeam Studio sessions and how, more importantly, to create an account, because in order to get to these, in order to access these, you're going to have an account and have to sign into that account. So what we're going to do, if I click sign in right here, is we're going to come over to create an account. So if you already have one, you can go ahead and skip part of this session. But I do want to point out one thing as we're going through and creating an account. Obviously, the first name, last name, that's pretty self-explanatory. But this section right here, the Bluebeam display name, it's really important that this is filled out properly. So I'm going to go ahead and put in my info here. And if I was filling this out, what I would be doing is I would be putting my first name, my last name, a space, hyphen space, and then I would be putting whatever architecture firm or whatever whatever company I am a part of. If you're just an owner builder, you can just say owner. But the idea here is that we know who you are, and if you're part of a company, we know that information too. So when we're putting this display name information in, we want to make sure that as you're filling this out, as you're going through and creating this Bluebeam Studio account, you have this information filled out properly. So I've already created an account, so I don't need to fill this out. I don't need to create an account. I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of here and just sign in. So I will go ahead and sign in. Give me 2 seconds here to sign in. I apologize. I have to get my login information. And so when we're signing in, putting in our username, we're putting in our password. And then once we've done that, there's one more location where we need to go to check our username a second time. So again, up here, so again, you can see I've logged into Studio. I'm now inside of these are now active. I can click and see my different projects and sessions. When you click up here, you might not see anything, or you might see a big long list of sessions. But this, now that you've created your account, you're getting further along to be able to access the review session that's created by San Francisco. Coming in, one last step I want to do for the account setup is I want to come over here to review, and I want to come down to the second one down, preferences. And inside of preferences, what we want you to do again is go ahead and in this location, in the general tab and in the username, we want you to add in that information as we put that in. So you get the idea. All right, so you want to put that information in so that it's clear when you're making any sort of response to a comment who the exact person is who's responding. So we've talked about the resources, we've talked about the account setup, and now I want to get into some of the best practices when we're working through here. And I want to talk a little bit about this applicant procedure. So we're going to be looking at this, and we're going to be following along with this applicant procedure. As I mentioned before, this applicant procedure can be found in that resources page on sf.gov. That information is going to be there for you. Let's just see. You can see sf.gov. All of the resources in here are available to you. But here, I'm going to kind of take you through some of the setup here. I've already just focused on the Studio account setup. I'm going to start now going in and talking about, first off, some of the best practices. But then once we get past the best practices, we're going to talk about the preparation of the documents for submittal. So that's the big topic we're going to focus on. But we want to talk a little bit more about best practices, and I want to take you on a little bit of a tour around this procedure as well before we get started. So let's talk about best practices and what are some of those. So as we're working through this, there's a couple things that are really important. And if I go to the best practices section and I start to look, it outlines some of these, but I'm going to focus on just a few. Probably the number one thing that we want to make sure every applicant understands when they're working and submitting to the City and County of San Francisco is that we don't want you to use what are called digital signatures. So you may or may not be familiar with a digital signature, but it's really important. When we say digital signature, what we mean is a certificate type signature. So you can see over here, if I'm working and I go to sign a document, it'll ask me to use a certificate for my digital signature. We don't want you using digital signatures. So we ask that you don't use digital signatures on any documents or forms that you're submitting into the City and County of San Francisco. We do, in some cases, do ask that you do include signatures, for example, on a stamp, for example. And in that case, what we may ask you to do is put in what we call a graphical signature. So you can see here's my signature here, but it's just a graphic signature. It's not a certificate type signature. So I want to make sure that we have that distinction in place. We usually get a lot of questions about that. Digital signatures are a no-no when it comes to submissions and submission documents. Number two is I want to make sure you understand that when you're submitting your PDF documents, you're submitting those documents on their own, so to speak. So what I mean by that is you'll have a set of documents, one PDF set for the drawings, for example. So again, there's not individual pages that are broken out. It's just one set of drawings. There'll be a PDF set for the specs. There'll be a PDF set for the calcs, any supporting forms or other signatures. Use an individual PDF for that. Don't take your specs, your calcs, your drawings, don't take and combine everything into one gigantic PDF and then ask us to try and decipher what is the content of each section. We want to make sure you understand that we're not bundling anything. We're submitting these drawing sets as one PDF, these specs as one PDF, and the supporting documents each as one PDF. And then number three, it's important to note that we include, when we're putting together our information, that we include the project address and the cover information on the cover page for sure, the sheet index page for sure, and honestly, I would put it on every other page as well, your project address, your information, so it's easy to find. Our goal here really is to make it as easy as possible as we're going through this process. So I'm going to now start to take you through some of the setup, and as I start to scroll through here, you can see this procedure, again, that's available to you online. This procedure really takes you through all of the steps. I'm going to start really with the naming. So the document naming, which I just covered right here, there is a whole section. There's a document naming section here. Just note that there is an exhibit covering naming, but even at the bottom in Appendix 1, found at the end of this document, you can see the naming instructions. So we're going to go ahead and start there. I'm going to come down here to Appendix 1, and I'm going to go ahead and let's say that we have a set of documents that we're ready to submit, right? We have our randomly named drawings that we want to submit. Now, obviously, we don't want to call these 100 CD. We don't want to give them a random name. We want to follow the naming structure that's put together by the City and County of San Francisco. So let's go ahead and I'm going to bring this up here. And let's go ahead and take a look in Appendix 1, some of the information that we have. A couple things that are really important to note when you're naming your document. The file names always contains three main parts. And one is the application number. Now, I understand your first submission maybe doesn't have an application number set up yet. So in that case, just put the street address in of the project. And then after that, we want, if there's an addenda or any information applied to that, we want that information. And then what type of document it is. We want to know, if we're looking at a PDF, we want to know if it's a drawing set, if it's a calc, if it's a spec. We want to know that information. We don't want to be guessing here as we're going through. So it's important that those three main components are included when you're providing a file name. If I scroll down here a little more, you can see it starts to really break this down, and eventually we'll get in and see some examples of some of the information here. So site drawings, building drawings, you can see all of this is provided to you in here, and you can use that information as a guide for you. I'm going to go ahead and grab this information here and use it kind of as my guide. So maybe I don't know, let's say my first submission doesn't have a bit of information about the application number. So maybe I just put in the address. So let's just say 001. So I have the address as one of my components. I have an addendum if there is one related to that. And then if there is none, I'll skip that, but then of course what it is. So in this case, I have building drawings, so I want to make sure that I include that information as I am setting up my naming structure. So once you learn the application number, once an application number is assigned, of course, you'll be substituting that application number instead of the address. But for the first submission that we're setting up, we want to at least get the naming structure in place and have it in good shape. So I have that. I'm going to go ahead and now open up this set, because this is the set we're going to use now for our setup. So we have a set of drawings, and this is typically what your PDF set will look like after you've created it out of AutoCAD, after you've created it from Revit. It might look a little better from Revit, but for the most part, what it's going to look like in comparison to what we want it to look like is going to be a very different thing. So what I'm going to do is, now that we have that submission in place, I'm going to start to look at what it maybe should look like and talk to you about those different components. And then we're going to go through and learn how to create those components. So when I look at my sheet here, a couple things pop out at me right away. And number one is that you can see at the bottom, there's already a whole bunch of markups here. We're going to get rid of those markups. It's important as well that we have some blank areas in place for the stamps. We'll talk about that. We want, as we look at this, we want to have, if I look at my proper set of drawings, we want to have nice labels for our pages. We want to have bookmarks identified for our pages. And then, of course, with layers, we don't want to see any layers, and we don't want to see any markups at the bottom. So all of this, we're going to go through step by step, and we're going to really start to get into this now. One last thing I want to talk about, because this is always a common question that we get, has to do with the versions of Bluebeam, the licensed, unlicensed versions of Bluebeam. And so before I even get into all of these different procedural components here that we identify in the table of contents, and we're going to run through here for the preparation of the documents, I want to point out one more appendix here, and that's Appendix 2 right here at the bottom. And in Appendix 2, I start to talk about, we include the information about the different versions of Bluebeams and how they're used. So let's cover that first, because that's a really big, important topic that a lot of people will ask about. So every section that's defined inside of here, and so you see we're right here talking about preparing the documents for submittals. In some cases, a lot of this is best practices, doesn't really apply necessarily to Bluebeam. But in some cases, I will go through and I will define for each of these items, creating the bookmarks, for example, if a paid version is required or if a free version is required. So what you can see here, This requires a licensed version. It can be any version of Bluebeam. So what I mean by that is it can be the 2020 version, the 2018 version, the 2017 version. It doesn't make any difference. Whereas as we go further down into the incorporation of comments, when we're actually inside of the Bluebeam Studio session making comments, or sorry, responding to comments, it's important to note here that really any free viewer version of Bluebeam will work for this. So you don't have to have a paid licensed version to be able to go in and respond to review comments, for you to send this information to your subs to look at some of these comments. All of that can be done with the free version. But when it comes to what we're talking about right now, at this point in this procedure, we're talking about the setup of documents, the preparation of documents for the submittal. A licensed version is required. So one more thing that was mentioned earlier is if you are a Mac user, we're going to cover what to do in that situation as well. But just note that a lot of this setup here that we're going to cover today, a lot of this setup requires a licensed version. And just also note, one question that was asked in the last training is a lot of this setup can actually be done, can somewhat be done in Adobe Acrobat Professional, but from the ease of use standpoint, Bluebeam is going to make it far easier to use. And from the standpoint of the Bluebeam Studio session, you do need Bluebeam to enter into the session. So let's go ahead now and come back and let's start to talk about, besides the best practices that we already focused on, besides the naming conventions that we already focused on, let's start talking about some of the really important components here. And I'm going to be going back and forth between our procedure and our drawing set, and we're going to start to format this as we go. So you can see here, it's important to have a blank area. And as identified in the procedure, an 8.5 by 11 blank area on the first page is required. So you, again, may want to write this down. An 8.5 by 11 blank area is required on the cover page. That's for stamps. And then in the title block itself, or on the right side here, a 2.5 inch by 3 inch blank space is required. And what's important is that that space is the same location. It's the same location on every page. So if I come back to my drawing set here, I look, I see I have my blank stamp, my 8.5 by 11 blank stamp area here. And then if I start to go through these pages, you can see over in this area, I have, far even bigger than the 2.5 by 3 inch size that's required in the title block. So you can see, I look through here and everything looks great. I have my blank area in place. So far, so good. Let's go ahead and continue. I'm going to go back to the table of contents, and we're going to kind of focus on these from the table of contents. We've got our blank stamp area. As far as document sizes and volumes is concerned, just know that we try to maintain it a PDF size under 500 gigabytes, just for ease of use. A lot of these document scale, you can read about on your own. They're pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to focus really on some of the really big ones here. This one, scan document prep, is a really important one, and it covers what happens if the documents are scanned at too high of a resolution. So let's talk about what I mean by that. As I scroll through these pages, as I click the advanced page button, you'll see as I'm advancing, the pages are regenerating pretty quickly, right? There's not a big slowdown in any of these. And when you're dealing in some cases with reference drawings, with scanned drawings, in some cases, there may be a question as to what resolution you should be working when you're scanning your drawings. So it's important to note what we're trying to avoid here. As I click through these, we're trying to avoid this regeneration process for this page, we're trying to avoid it taking like a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes for the actual page to appear. And as I go through these, you can see they go through pretty fast. It's only really when you hit a reference page, some of these earlier pages maybe that are hand drawn and are scanned in, when you hit those pages, in some cases it takes a long time. So just note that when you're doing this, if you're using reference pages, your scan, your DPI of your scan should be somewhere in the neighborhood of 90 to 100 DPI for your scan. A lot of people think, okay, I want to scan it at 600 because that's the best. But if that's the case, it's going to take 5-10 minutes for this for this page to even show up here. And obviously that's going to cause issue for your drawing set. So coming back here, just note that as you're looking at your scanned area, you want to be somewhere in the neighborhood of about 92, 95, 100 DPI for your scanned pages. So let's keep going. So beyond the scanned pages, let's talk about page labels and bookmarks. So you can see these page labels and bookmarks here. I'm going to talk about them sort of interchangeably. And what we're going for, you can see my completed set already. What we're going for here is in the bookmarks. Again, this button may not be in this location, it may be somewhere else. What we're looking to have an actual sheet index duplicated in such a way that I can actually go through and see all the pages very easily. So you see, as I go through and I start to look at my set that I'm prepping here, no bookmarks exist. With the page labels, let me come back here. What we're trying to focus on is the page labels which exist inside of the thumbnails. So those of you who are, again, Adobe users, you're probably pretty familiar with this. We want to see how these pages are not listed as page 5, 6, 7, 8. These pages are actually listed with the correct page label. So the label of the page is actually applied. We're going to learn how to do that today. And so again, when I come back to my set, you can see there's 5, there's 6, there's 7. As I scroll through this whole set, you see there's nothing particularly informative about this page label. We just know that it happens to be page 60. We don't know if that's mechanical, architectural, structural, just that it's page 60. So you can see, talking about these things and looking at them from the perspective of a page label that gives you information versus one that doesn't, and a bookmark that navigates you through the drawing versus not having bookmarks at all. These two items, page labels and bookmarks, are really substantial. So when we're talking about creating the bookmarks, when we're talking about creating the page labels here inside the thumbnails, this is a really important topic that needs to be concluded as we're going through our setup. So let's go ahead and do that. Now I list these together and I talk about these together because when I'm looking at my thumbnails and my bookmarks here, so here's my thumbnails, here's my bookmarks, you'll notice that the creation of these happens up here, create page labels. If I click on this, you see it gives me information asking me to select a page region and then apply it to a page range. If I come over here to my bookmarks and do the same thing, I click on the create, it asks me to select a page region and apply it to a page range. So the process for creating either one of these is exactly the same. And then one other thing to note is that once one has been created, the other can be created as well automatically. So what I mean by that is if the page labels have already been completed, I can just use those page labels to create my bookmarks. Coming back here, if I create my bookmarks first and create all those, then I can use my bookmarks to create my page labels. See, so the creation of page labels can happen based upon the bookmarks, just like the creation of bookmarks can happen based upon the creation of the page labels. So we want to, really all we have to do is we have to get one of them done correctly. And once one of them is done correctly, then the other will follow automatically from that. So let's talk about this process of finding a page region. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here to my bottom corner of my title block. And here you can see, I want to talk about one thing that's really important when it comes to the setup of your drawings. I already mentioned that in your title block, you should have your project address and your information, right? But one other thing that's really important when you're creating a set of documents is that you have consistency. And what I mean by that is twofold. Consistency in the naming. So you see, as I kind of scroll through these pages, you'll see, it doesn't switch from A3.0 to A3-0 or -1. We're not switching around between the naming structure, the numbering structure. So that's number one when it comes to consistency. And then number two is that it's in the exact same location. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start by creating our thumbnails. We're going to do those first and then use those to create our bookmarks. So when creating our thumbnails, we're going to be looking at a page region. So we're going to be looking at this little region around here, and we're going to select that region and then look, in every single time we're going to look in that same location and hopefully find this page number. Same thing with the title of the drawing. We're going to look in this region right here, and every single time on every single page, we're going to be looking in this region and looking here to make sure that, and to find our page number. So what can happen in some instances, if you're inconsistent in your title block, if your subcontractors are using different title blocks, so for example, you see the difference, obviously here, everything is the same as all the other pages, but when I come to this page, you see maybe we switch this out with a different trade, and they use their own title block. They put their number in a different location versus this number, right? They put their title in a different location versus this title. So when I do my range, when I create my labels and I look in my range, it's going to work great for all of the pages that are consistent, and it's not going to work for the page that's inconsistent. So when you're working and putting your title blocks together, a couple things to note: consistency when it comes to the numbering and naming of the documents, and then consistency when it comes to the title block and the location of the information. So let's come back. I'm going to come back. Actually, we'll go to this one. Looks good. And I'm going to go ahead and create my page labels now. I'll show you how to do that. So again, I'm coming up to create. I'm coming to page region, and I'm selecting a region that's going to identify first the number. So notice when I make this, I make it kind of big, and the reason is in case there's any little bit of shifting, from side to side here, or the number is a really big number that goes all the way over to the end. I want to make sure I pick it up. So I'll go ahead and select that region 1, which is this number structure. After that, once I get up here, I'm going to put a space, a hyphen, and then a space. And this space is really important that you add it in, because now what I'm going to do, you're going to find out later why, but I'm going to go ahead and add in I got my number. Now I'm going to add in my name. So I click add, and again, I'm selecting another region. So again, I'm going to kind of make a big region around here. Maybe not quite there, right around there. And that's going to be my second region, and anything that Bluebeam finds inside of that, hopefully this name on every page, it's going to add. So you can see now you're starting to understand why it's so important to have consistency in your title block. If these are all over the place, then this is going to be incredibly hard to create our page labels here for our thumbnails. But for us, We hit OK, we choose all the pages, and what it's going to do is it's going to go through all of those pages, look in that region, that location for all of those pages, and it's going to pick up using OCR, it's going to pick up this information. So you see now, instead of being page 52 or whatever, it's going to be, you can see very clearly that it's showing all of the pages. So you can see in some cases, maybe it has a little bit of a problem. For some reason, it didn't pick up that A55. I would need to double click and come in here and do a quick fix here. So you see I'm still maintaining that structure as I create it. But as I scroll through, I can see, I can see that these are really starting to look really good in here. All of my names and numbers, my sheet numbers are all really, really consistent as I come through. On my first page even that one looks good. Now let's come down to our final page. Remember this one with this inconsistent title block. So you can see this one is really pretty messed up, but if I'm going to give myself a little more room, and what I'll do is I'll click this. So you can see it picked up the name okay. Obviously it didn't, it picked up a bunch of other stuff, but it did not pick up that S101. Add that in, I'll add in a space and I'll put that information in. If I wanted to, let me cancel that. If I wanted to, if there was a grouping of, let's say 10 pages, what I could do is I could select those 10 pages and then using the shift key, and then I could run this a second time. And if I run it a second time, having some pages selected, you'll see it picks those up. It picks up those selected pages and it tells me to create that information for that region, for that selected set of pages. I'll show you just with this one page, just so you can see one more time how to do the page labels. Again, I'm clicking create page labels. I'm selecting my page region right here. I'm choosing first the sheet number. You can see then I'm putting a space hyphen space. I'm adding down here the name. And again, you can see with this one, I can get really close. There's only one page. Adding that information in, and then I hit OK, and then I apply it to whatever number of pages I want to apply, whether it's a selected number of pages, all the pages, or in this case, just the current page. So you see when I make those two region selections and apply it and hit OK, you see it picks up and applies that information to that page. So like I said before, we've created one and now we're going to create the other based upon it. So I've gone and I've created my thumbnails and I cycle through and those look really, really good. And now for the creation of my bookmarks, I don't really need to do anything fancy. I need to hit create bookmarks right here. And when I click create bookmarks, you see I don't need to make my regions anymore. I don't need to select anything. All I need to do is choose my page labels because I've already made those and those are perfect. So I just choose my page labels to create my bookmarks. I'm going to do all the pages. I'm going to hit OK and you see there's my bookmarks. So now I can easily cycle through all my pages. I know which pages are architectural. I know which pages are structural. I know I have this information. I know the general pages. I know all of that. But one last thing that we want to do when after we create our bookmarks is we want to nest those bookmarks. So again, a lot of times Revit users will have the bookmarks, will have the page labels created for them, but they'll miss this step. So this is an important step. When we're working with bookmarks here in our drawing, we want to nest them. And what that means is we want to, I'll come in and show you here, we want to apply the trades specific to those specific drawings. So in this case, we have a general trade, we have an architectural trade, and we have a structural trade down here at the bottom. So we'll cover that. I go to the first page right? So I go to the first page before I do anything, and that counts as I go through, right? I'll go to the first page here, I'll come and do the first page here. And when you get to that first page, right click and click add before. So remember, I'm in the bookmarks, and what I'm going to do is by right clicking, I'm going to add a new bookmark. See that little bookmark there? I'm going to be adding it, and I'm going to be adding it before this one, so on top of this one essentially. So I click add before. For the sake of time, I'll just put a G instead of typing in the word general. And then once I have that, I'm going to go ahead and select these guys here. I'll use the shift key to select it, and then I'm going to kind of drag it up and just slightly over to the right. So you see it doesn't put it kind of here, it puts it here. And it doesn't put it above or anywhere else. I want to kind of move it just a bit over. And so you see what it does is it creates a little kind of folder structure now that nests this up inside of here. So again, I'll do it one more time so you can see it. I come to the first page of what it is, right click, add before, and type out the trade. So in this case, architectural. And once I've done that, then I'll go and I'll select all the sheets that are associated with it. And then I'll come back up and I just drag up just slightly and over just slightly. So just a little bit up and over to place those inside of that nesting. So now you can see I can really start to roll this up. I've got one more trade left. I'll do that quickly. Again, click on the first page, add before, type in your trade, then come back, drag it up and over. So there you go. You see now we have our nested set. Our bookmarks are in place. We have just a few more items to check off of our list here going through this procedure. After bookmarks, we want to check a few more things, specifically layers and then hyperlinks, and then we'll flatten our document. So let's talk about those last three. So here, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and remove the layers. And so what happens is a lot of times when you're, especially when you're using AutoCAD or Revit, it's going to include all of the layers that are associated with the drawing. It's going to include those in, and what's the problem with that is it's going to give you the ability to turn those off. And so what we don't want to happen is we don't want our reviewers to accidentally turn off half of our drawing because they accidentally clicked over here on one of the layers. So what we're going to do is we're just going to come to the layers, and you can, if there are a whole bunch of them, you can just select all of them, right click and select delete. And we're not deleting any of the content, right? We're not deleting what's on the page or any writing on the page. We're only deleting the layer itself. So we make sure we leave these unchecked and just select delete. And we're deleting the layer itself. And again, it's just important that we do that just to be as a precaution to make sure that no one accidentally starts to come in here and click on the little eye and turn some of these layers off. If you turn those layers off, something might be missed in the review, and then everyone's just going to be really confused because they don't know what happened to half the document. So we've checked the layers. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to talk about hyperlinks. And coming back to the procedure, one thing I do want to note here is if you look in the appendix when it comes to some of these steps are optional, and this hyperlinking is one of those optional steps. And the reason is because it requires a different version of Bluebeam. So there are 3 different versions of Bluebeam. The one that the one that does most of the work, well, all of them do most of the work, but you need the extreme version in order to create these batch hyperlinks. So that's why it's an optional step. But just note that it's really important. It's a really important step, and it will again help kind of speed up our process. So before I make them, let me show you what they are and what they do. As I come in and look at this floor plan for this building and I start to zoom in, you can see there's some section cuts, there's some details, elevations, there's a bunch of cuts here, and you can see they have a little yellow next to them. When I zoom in, notice what happens to my mouse. See how it changes It changes into like a little finger as I get closer to it. What that means is that indicates that there's a hyperlink. So when I click on this, it will take me to that section. And then if inside of that section, there's a detail call out, I can click again and it will take me to that detail call out. So you can see here, I can maneuver around the drawing pretty quickly. There's also a back button, kind of a previous view button. And what that will do is that will take you again, kind of back to where you started. So you can kind of move your way around here, go to your pages, take a look, go back, go to a different page, take a look, go back, and work your way through the entire set of drawings. You know, find some of the different section cuts here, find those section cuts, come in, you know, you need to look at your detail, you go ahead and click and it takes you right to that detail. So from the perspective of a review, remember what our ultimate goal is here. Our ultimate goal as applicants is to get our review done quickly. And so the more, the easier it is for a reviewer to navigate your drawing, the easier it is for a reviewer to find that elevation that they're looking for or that detail that they're looking for, the easier it is, the easier it's going to be and the faster that your review is going to happen. So just when you're thinking about the reason for doing some of these, think about our ultimate goal here, and that is a speedy review. So we're trying to make this whole process as efficient as we possibly can by formatting the documents in such a way that they will be reviewed even faster than previously. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about the last step here in our procedure. Let me come back to our table of contents. And this is a really important one. This is just one more thing. It's flattening the document. We've created our hyperlinks. We've removed our layers. And we need to flatten the document. Oh, sorry, I apologize. I need to show you how to do hyperlinks. Let me show you how to do that. So let's show you how to create those hyperlinks, how to get to the point where these are very easily set up here. And as I mentioned before, this requires the extreme version of Bluebeam. So in some cases, you may come to where I'm going, which is down to batch link right here, and you may not even see link as a choice. It may not even be a choice for you when it comes to this. So if that's the case, just note what version of Bluebeam you have. If I come over here to About, I can see that I have the extreme version. Okay, so this is all based upon my thumbnails. And so back when I was talking about creating our bookmarks and our thumbnails, I really said the thumbnails are really important and that space there was really important. So let's show how this applies. I'm going to come to batch, to link, and then to new. And when I do, it's going to ask me to add the open files. It's going to ask me basically to pick which file I want to focus on. So here I'm focused on my drawing set. I'll just uncheck the other two. And when I hit next, now what it's going to do is it's going to ask me to go through my page labels, right? Remember I said the page labels that we're looking at right here. That's why these are so important. And what it's going to do is I'm based upon my page labels, it's going to start scanning those page labels, which means it's going to start reading from left to right. And so when it reads from left to right in my settings, it's going to go from the beginning and it's going to wait until it gets to a space. So when it gets to a space, remember I said it was really important to add a space right there. When it gets to that space, then it's going to determine its searching, its search term. So I hit OK and I hit generate, and you see what it did was it went through all these page labels. It searched until it found a space. It generated its term, which is what happens to coincide with these call outs here, these page numbers. And so now what's going to happen is when we're on one of these, you know, when we're on one of these call outs and it's asking for a section and it tells you that it's going to send you to pay that section is A73, it'll just send you to page 32, which is the page that that section lives on. So the way this is done again is you go to batch and then link and then new. And then from here, from the page labels, we're setting it to go till it hits a space. Then we're clicking generate, and all of that information you see generates all of these. One last thing we can do, you notice when you look at these, some of these are a little bit of a yellow color. If you want, you can actually go to link options here and you can set a little highlight. So my little appearance property highlight of yellow is kind of nice. That way it just kind of shows you exactly where these are all over the sheets. So I do all that and I click run. And when I click run, what happens is it takes you through the document and creates all of these hyperlinks for you within this document. So we've covered hyperlinks. Now let's just talk about the very last step, which is very simple. It's flattening the document. So by flattening the document, what we're doing here is we are coming in, we're making sure that, again, that there's this markups list isn't full of what we call clutter here, right? A lot of times, especially when you're using AutoCAD, AutoCAD adds a whole bunch of SHX text onto your documents. And what it's going to do is it's going to add that information, and then it's going to make it really hard for the reviewer to add their comments, because their comments are going to have to be mixed in with, in some cases, this adds hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these little markup things. So we don't want to just delete it all, because that'll delete text on the document itself. What we want to do is we want to flatten the document and flatten it down so that we have a very clean markups list here at the bottom. So I'll come to document over here, and I'll come down to flatten. Some of you may have a button for flatten. You see I have a button for it right there, but I'll choose flatten here. And I don't have to do anything special. All I have to do really is just come in here and click flatten, uncheck if this is possibly checked, uncheck that unflatten ability, and just click flatten. And when you do that, again, not many changes need to be made. Just basically click the button and click flatten. What it will do is it will remove all of the markups down in this list, and it will permanently kind of apply them to the document. So we've gone through all of the steps for the document preparation. We've gone through all of the different steps. There's one last important step as we're preparing the files for submittals, and that is adding this backcheck page. Before I talk about that, I do want to just mention, when it comes to your other supporting documents and your specifications, obviously we don't have to go through all of those steps that we just did for the documents, but a couple important things: we do want the layers to be removed so nothing accidentally gets turned off. We do want the document to be flattened so that there's not 1,000 markups down here in the markups list that we have to sift through. And we want, in some cases, we want some bookmarks to be added. So you'll look at those. It's dependent upon the document for how you actually set it up. So let's talk about now the last step before submitting, and that is adding this backcheck page. You may have noticed when I was here going through submitting your information, you may have noticed in a couple of spots it's asking about adding in the backcheck page. If I go back and I start to look through here, you'll see as we start to look at this, it's talking about adding that backcheck page to your plans, one of the big topics that must be done. So if I click here, it gives me a document right here that I can download. So again, I just click and download it and save it. And once I have it saved, I go ahead and open it up. So let's see if I can find mine. I'll go ahead and open it. And this page looks something like this. And what I want to do in this case is I want to do just what it says, essentially, is I have my plans completed, right? I have everything looking great in my plan set. And once I have my plans completed, I'm going to have my PDF set created. I'm going to add this page at the end of the PDF file and then just save the PDF. And what this does is it applies a special menu that we use for San Francisco for the design review. So it's not particularly difficult. Probably most of you may have added pages to PDFs before. I'll call them up to document right here, and then we're going to insert a page from the document. And again, within Bluebeam, you can add the open files, find the one that's yours. Here it is. There's the back check menu page. I don't want the procedure added, so I'll remove that. But I'm just essentially picking this single page that I have downloaded and opened. I'm picking this single page right here, and I'm going to add it after the last page of my document. So essentially it'll just be the new last page. So I select the document and I'm inserting that page as the last page. So I click OK, and you can see this page has been added at the end of my plan. So now if I come in here and I look at my set of drawings, you can see at the very end of my drawing set I have my page. So that's the last step in the setup of the documents. Now we've completed the setup and we're ready now for submission for electronic plan review. So let's talk about that. I'm going to come back here, and I have obviously created everything and everything looks great. What I would want to do is I would want to obviously save this document, save all the naming I've done, save all the formatting I've done, save everything I've done, and get it in the correct PDF shape with the last page, the back check page added, everything ready to go. Once I have that ready to go, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back now and submit my files. So again, we're going back to sf.gov. And one important thing to note here is the initial submittal that you submit is submitted here through sf.gov. Your initial submittal comes to sf.gov. So you can see for building permit applications, for site permit applications, your first submittal, creating your PDF, following the rules that I just covered, getting the upload file. Oh, it looks like it's 350 instead of, I think I said 500. So 350 is a even better size. Adding in your information, adding that back check page, any addenda or anything else as needed. And what you're then doing is finally coming in and you're submitting directly through sf.gov. So that's your initial submission. That is your initial setup. And what's going to happen now behind the scenes is that information is going to be taken, going through an intake process. And then once the intake process is completed, the Bluebeam Studio session will be created and you'll be invited to the session. Now, before I move away from this topic, I just want to cover in the applicant procedure here. I mentioned, again, the initial submission goes through sf.gov. The subsequent submission will go directly into the Bluebeam Studio session. So you can see it reads here as applicable, but I'm just telling you basically how they're going to ask for you in 9 times out of 10 to submit, and that's going to be directly into the session. Just note that the instructions are here in this section right here when it talks about submitting documents. Okay, so let's talk about what you're going to end up with, what's going to happen. As I mentioned before, you're going to submit your drawing set. That's going to be submitted through sf.gov. And once it's submitted through sf.gov, what's going to happen is a session will be created, right? So as I come in here, you can see I will join into this session. And now I'm going to show you guys what it looks like typically when you get invited. What you'll get is you'll either get an email from EPR directly with a link, or you may get an email from Bluebeam. So they may invite you directly through Bluebeam. One way or another, you're going to get an invitation that's going to have a nice little link right here. When you click that link, what it's going to do is it's going to open up Bluebeam. It's going to go into Studio. It's going to make sure you've logged in. So you need to be logged into Bluebeam Studio, as we talked about at the beginning, in order to do this. And then finally, it's going to bring you in and join you into this session. Now, I'm going to leave this session for just 1 second because I want to mention something. Once you join into this session, you see this is the 0001 Van Ness session that I've created. Unfortunately, I apologize, you guys cannot join into it. I've locked you out. But once you have joined in and then you leave the session, what's going to happen is that session should go in your session list. So it should be here in your list. And if you want, once you're here, once you're looking at it in the list view, if you want to set up notifications so that you know exactly when the reviewers are adding comments or making changes to your documents, you can right click here and you can manage your notifications here. So this is a little bit tricky because people think, oh, I need to join the session in order to find this, but you're actually outside of the session. Right click in the list and click manage notifications. And in here, you can have emails sent to you when basically any updates happen, when any markups happen, when any activity happens. By turning all of this on and setting these preferences this way, what's going to happen is you're going to really know exactly when the reviewers are in looking at your document once you are invited into this session. Because once you're in it, you're going to be in it for the duration, and you'll be able to see any changes that happen because you're going to be linked to this session itself. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and let's join into the session. And when you're in the session, you're going to see, obviously, your drawings will be in here and they're going to have comments, right? So you might see some forms as well that are in here. And again, as I mentioned several times before, let's not have any digital signatures when we're dealing with the forms. But let's look at the drawing set here. You're going to start to see comments by the different reviewers. You can see I click on these and it'll start to tell me the person, whether they're a fire reviewer, whether they're a DBI reviewer. You'll start to see that information now. You're obviously going to see what page all of these comments are on because you did such a diligent job of setting up your page labels. And basically what you're going to be doing now is picking up your comments, right? You're going to be responding to your comments. You're going to be creating, if there are comments, you're going to be creating your subsequent submission. You're going to be clouding any changes that you make in that subsequent submission. And you're going to be, eventually getting to the point where after you've picked up all these comments, responded to all these comments, you will upload that subsequent submission directly into the Bluebeam Studio session. So let's talk about the process of picking up comments here. You can see, I'm going to start to kind of organize this list down here. A lot of what's going to happen is going to happen down here inside of this markups list. So the markups list that I have in place, you notice if I click on the comments, you see it cycles through them. Not really that easy maybe to spot unless I zoom in a little bit, because once I zoom in now, when I click, you see it zooms me to that entire comment. So you can see I can really clearly see the comment and what it's pointing at, all that information. So as the applicant, what you're going to be doing in this case is you're going to be asked to start to respond to those reviewer comments. So the reviewer has made a comment here, and let's say that they're asking you to add in a little bit of information here. No problem. What you're going to do is, again, you select the comment, and you notice when I select the comment, it highlights it right here, just like if I highlight it here, it selects it here. So the comment is essentially selected. You're going to come over here to the status menu and you're going to double click. And when you double click, you're going to be given some choices. So again, the way I did that was I clicked and it selected it, and then I went to this location and I double clicked. That brings up a subsequent menu. It brings up a set status menu. I could also right click and I could set status if I wanted to. But when I double click my applicant's response, I have two choices. Either I'm going to incorporate it, which is probably going to be most of the time, or I'm going to not incorporate it. So you see here, when I incorporate it, you'll notice that it just changed color. So it's kind of, I have information to know what's going on here by looking at the color of these. Let's go to the next one. Maybe it's asking you to change this door. Let's say that I have an issue with that. Maybe they want a single door here, or they want a larger door, but it's not required by code. So I'm going to maybe just try and see if I can not incorporate it, and then maybe we'll talk about what we do with the reviewer to see what we can do to resolve this. So in most cases, you're going to be incorporating it. What we'd like you to do as well, unless it's really, really obvious that they're asking you to fix a typo and you fix that typo, unless it's really obvious, we want you to also add in a reply. So what we mean by that is, let's say that in this case, they asked you to add an additional column or something like that. You might reply and say additional, column added. Whatever, right? So you really want to make it as easy for them to understand exactly where your correction has been made, so that especially if there's any big changes, like let's say it goes to another page instead of 00 page, you put it on 01 page. You want them to be able, even if it's an incorporated comment, you want the reviewer to be able to find it as easily as possible. So in addition to setting that incorporated status, you're also right-clicking and you're adding in a reply. Now, certainly if you're not incorporating a comment, they ask you to put in a larger door. Let's say they ask you to put in, a 36-inch door, and then you can reply back and say that you're not going to incorporate it. You can add in a reply and state that, 32-inch door is per code, whatever. So you get the idea here. If there are reviewer comments that you want to respond, you want to kind of communicate back and forth with the reviewer, then you can use this system here down in the markups to do that. So let me continue, just show you a few more examples. Maybe a comment is made by the fire person. He wants you to add information here again in the checklist. Of course, you double click right here, you'd set the field to be incorporated. You could add in a reply. And basically the idea here is that you're going through and you're picking up all of the comments, right? All the comments have been made by the reviewers, and your job as the applicant is to come in and pick these up and to communicate back to the reviewer how it was fixed. So whether an additional detail has been added or some other information, you are creating your subsequent submission. You're creating your next drawing set that you're going to submit. You want to cloud that change that you've made, but you also want to indicate here where they can go find that change. So that's taking you through the process. When we're down here and when we're starting to make these status changes, just note a few things. One is, as you're working, you can start to sort this. You can see I sorted this by author by just clicking on this top. And by sorting by author, you can see I kind of organized my DBI reviewers versus my fire reviewers just by clicking at the top tab right here. I could sort by page. I could start to look at the individual pages where comments exist and then work that way. Or I could sort by the status itself, or use the filter. Using the filter, I could start to maybe filter all the ones that are incorporated, not incorporated, or open or closed when you come to the back check process. You're basically able to filter out by individual authors. So if you wanted to only look at the fire, let's say you're only responding to fire comments, you can start to filter out your list and only look at those. So just note that you have some options when you're working here in Bluebeam using the filter or using the sort, which is just clicking on the header of the thing. So going through, creating your subsequent submission, clouding the revisions that you make in that subsequent submission, eventually what will happen is you will be creating revision 2, so a rev 2. And coming back to the procedure, coming back to the submission of documents, and we just talked about the incorporation, the filtering, the applicant response, the reply. We've talked about all that. We're now talking about subsequent submittals. And again, for those subsequent submittals, just note that in this case, we are submitting directly into the Bluebeam Studio session. So let's talk about that. Okay, so let's see. I apologize if you guys are hearing all of the sirens outside. I live in the middle of downtown Los Angeles, so I apologize for that. Anyways, let's get to the subsequent submittals. Obviously, what you're creating here is you are creating this revision 2 document, right? You have this rev 2, this subsequent submission, and you want to take this and you need to get it into this Bluebeam Studio session. So what you'll do is you'll come to the session and you're going to look for this button right here. In the documents where you find all your current documents, you're going to see an upload button, hopefully, depending on your permission status, but you'll see that button. And when you click that button, what it's going to do is it's going to give you the option to go ahead and come in and open a document here. So let me just take you through this. So I'm going to go to my training and my subsequent submission, and I'm going to find my document and I'm going to go ahead and open. And what that's going to do is it's going to add in that rev2 file. Now, before you've added in that rev2 file, you got to make sure of a whole bunch of things just the same as you checked when you created your initial submittal. So you don't get off the hook by creating a subsequent submittal. This rev2 version still needs to have page labels. It still needs to have bookmarks, and it still needs to have that back check page added at the end. So the process that you went through formatting your initial submittal, you'll need to go through that process again for your subsequent submittal. And now I know probably some of you are typing in the question right now, well, if only one page has been changed, there's only a comment, let's say on a few pages, can I just submit those few pages? Unfortunately, the answer is no. You have to submit an entire revised set. So this rev2, this submission, the subsequent submission, it has to be an entire revised set with all the pages that were in the original submission. You can't submit just a few pages. We have to resubmit, I should say, all of the pages as one document. Because at the end of the day, we want a complete set and we want to get to the approval stage and we want to make sure that everything is in place. So what I'll do now is I want to take you through the back check process, and then we're going to move on to maybe some questions, and then we're going to kind of talk about the Mac users as well. So we have created our original set of documents. We submitted those through sf.gov. Those got uploaded into a session. We got invited into this session and we joined in this session. Inside the session, we responded to those comments using that status menu. And then, of course, we, as part of our corrections of these comments that were made, we created our Rev 2, our subsequent submission. We followed all of the procedural documents, including naming it correctly using the Rev 2, including creating the bookmarks, the page labels, and all of the other information, flattening the document, removing the layers, adding that backcheck page. We uploaded that document, as you can see, directly into the Bluebeam Studio session. So the instructions on how to do that are right here, how to go in and upload directly. Once we've done that now, I'm going to take you through the process that the reviewer will do, just so you have an understanding of what happens next here. So the reviewer is going to come in, is going to see that the comments were incorporated, right? And then what they're going to do is they're going to come to their subsequent submission, and they're going to start to come in and check to make sure that these comments have indeed been picked up. So in most cases, it's pretty cut and dry. They asked for a correction, you made that correction, you said you incorporated it. They're going to come in, and as the back check reviewer, they're going to close your comment. So you can see that comment has been closed. That comment turns gray in your initial submission. That comment is now basically a closed out comment. We don't have to worry about it anymore. In another one, let's say that you decided that you would maybe challenge the reviewer. In that case, maybe there was a phone call, maybe there was more information shared with emails or with phone calls. If that's the case, I strongly suggest, again, you use the reply here to include all of that information, just to make it as easy as possible for the reviewer to have an understanding of why you didn't comply with their request to make a correction. So you could say per phone call on, August 20th, not required, or something like that. So that information, the more you add, the more information you provide, the easier it's going to be as part of this submission. But let's just say that if there is a problem, maybe there's still an issue with this particular one, there's still a problem. What may happen is that this comment may be left open. And if this comment is left open, what's going to happen is, in some cases, it's either going to be left open here, or it's going to make its way to the new drawing set. And in the new drawing set, it's going to, let's see if we can paste this guy here. It's going to be included into that new drawing set, and it's going to still be an active comment that you're going to have to, as the applicant, come back and respond to, and either non-incorporate it or incorporate it. And so then you'll need to create a Rev 3, a subsequent submission again, and submit that subsequent submission by using the upload button as part of that session. So going through this, you'll see that in most cases, the comments will be closed out. Hopefully not too many will be remaining open, but this is where, again, you can start to use your filter and start to look in the filtered list and start to find the open comments. This is where you can start to really have a better understanding of everything. Let me clear this whole thing, make it a little easier on us. There we go. So now we can find our open comments. So again, the real goal here is obviously to get approval. So we're going to want to provide as much information as possible as we're responding to these comments. Now, when you get to that subsequent submission, again, what you're doing is you're doing the same thing. You're checking that subsequent submission to make sure that it includes, number one, that back check page here. You're making sure that it has its bookmarks, it has its thumbnails, and it has its layers and its markups list empty. So you're basically repeating that process until you get to the approval phase. in the approval phase, what will happen is once the project's approved, what's going to happen is obviously the files will be taken out of the session, brought into the Bluebeam Studio project, which you guys don't have access to, but then a link to your approved stamped files will be sent to you. So you have that information all set for you. Okay, so Rebecca, let me ask you, hopefully you're still out there somewhere. Do we want to go right into the Mac user, or do you think we should take some questions first and then talk about that Mac user procedure?
We have enough time to probably do. Why don't we jump into questions
Okay.
and see if there are any? I'm not seeing anything in the chat yet, though.
Really? Wow.
I know.
It's because in the last one, I made a note of all the questions that were asked, and I covered all of those questions in this particular presentation. So you're right, though. I don't see any either, which is very strange. We should see at least a few. Interesting.
Okay, audience, this is your time. If you have any questions, please include them in the chat. And so how about we do this, since there are no questions right now, Troy, okay. I would suggest you go into the Mac procedure and then we'll see.
Absolutely.
If we have anything pop up.
Okay, great. All right. So we know that there are Mac users out there, and we know that for those users, Bluebeam has discontinued its support of the Mac environment as of a little over a year ago. And so obviously it's going to make life difficult for you, and we don't want that. So we have created an additional procedure. Now, again, I know everyone who's thinking, where are my these procedures, Troy keeps showing, where do I find those? Just to remember again, I'll go through electronic plan review resources. If I click on the resources and I scroll down, you can see some of these Mac user and other information is provided for you. So having said that, let's talk a little bit about this exhibit, which is exhibit K1, which is a guide for applicants who are unable to access Bluebeam. Now, a couple things I'll note here is that obviously the ideal situation that is going to get the most expedient review is going to be to use Bluebeam. There are going to be other options, which I think Rebecca can talk about at the end here, for users who are non-Bluebeam users for one reason or another. But just note that using some of these other options may be potentially lead to a slower review process versus using Bluebeam for the review. I'll take you through going through this exhibit, and again, this was created specifically for Mac users, and the idea here is that the files that are here in the session, these files, once they have their comments added, this file will be removed from the session, it'll be extracted from the session, and it'll be emailed or it will be sent to you versus using the SF Secure Share, which is a file sharing environment that CCSF has. So you'll get a link to the files themselves, or you'll get the files. And what you'll want to do is download those files, and then using a software application like Adobe Acrobat Reader, for example, you can go ahead and open up these files. And all of these screenshots were created in the Mac environment, so I know that they work. They're using this is the latest as of a few months ago, the latest version of Acrobat Reader that all the screenshots were taken on. And so the idea here is that you still, even though you're in this Adobe Acrobat Reader environment, you still have the ability to look at your thumbnails. You still have the ability to look at the comments. You will still have the ability to set your status to, the status button down here. You'll still have that ability to respond to those reviewer comments. And finally, you'll have the opportunity in here to add a reply as well. So all of this is covered in this document, and I take, like all the other procedures, they cover step by step exactly how to go through this process, how to find, you know, the different locations of like where to respond, where to set the status, all of that. It's all covered here for you in that non-Bluebeam user guide right here. So again, just note that our ultimate goal is to be working as much in Bluebeam as we can, but we understand that in some cases users will not have that opportunity, and we want to be accommodating for those users. So with that, I will just come back one last time because again, I think this is important enough that I want to stress it a second time. You know, one of the first things you may want to do is go to obviously get this document, but then once you have it, start to look at the version that you have of Bluebeam, start to look at what part of this document is applicable specifically to the paid version, what document requires Bluebeam Studio Extreme, what parts of this document will work with the free version. Doesn't matter if it's an old version or a new version, doesn't make any difference. But that sort of response, all of that information is down here at the end of this document for you. And that I think should be maybe your starting point as you're starting to look at maybe coming up to review, understanding what version of review that you have when you're looking at this. So I think that covers everything. Rebecca, I don't know if we've had a flood of questions since my last 5 minutes have gone through.
We have no questions. You must
Oh,
be
it's
super
very
thorough
odd.
today.
I guess so. I don't know. I don't think we can unmute people to even allow them to ask questions. So again, if you do have a question, this is your opportunity to type that question into the chat, and we should be able to see it coming from the chat.
Just as a reminder, everyone, also, if the question isn't coming to you now, but it comes to you later, you can send questions about the training or our process to permitcenter@sfgov.org. It's Permit Center, one word, at sfgov.org. Well, we're not getting any questions, so Troy, is there any last parting words?
No, I mean, just again, you know, you can see right now on the screen, we have the email for you to send in your questions. It is very odd that we are not seeing any questions whatsoever. But I'm looking at the same chat you're looking at, Rebecca. So I guess we're good to go. Everyone gets 24 minutes of their life back. So that's all I have. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. And just know that we're here and these resources are here. We try to make it as easy as possible for you to be able to really streamline your review process, because we all know that the ultimate goal on your end is to get this done as quickly as possible. And so we want to give you that opportunity to make it efficient.
Exactly. So the training, this training has been recorded. We'll post it when it becomes available. And again, if you have any questions later, or suggestions or comments or thoughts, please send them to the Permit Center and we'll get right back to you. But I want to thank Troy Barbu from AECOM. His part partner at AECOM, Carolyn Stagen. I'd like to mention her also. They have been great in, working with the city and county of San Francisco, many departments, and putting this workflow together for us in a way that works with our different technologies and our different processes. So we really have great hopes that this will help us provide better service to everyone and get through plan reviews, particularly for the larger projects, much more efficiently than if we were doing them on paper. But again, thank you to AECOM, who has helped us get here. And we are looking forward to the next chapter in our electronic plan review journey. So thank you all for attending today.
And Rebecca, maybe just before we cut off, maybe just check and make sure there's no meeting chat setting or anything that might have turned off the chat. I mean, I don't think there is, but let's just maybe double check that. I'm looking for it as well, and I'm not seeing anything.
Yeah, nor am I.
Okay, all right. It just seems so strange that no one had a question. So I'm thinking maybe there's something up with the settings and related to the chat feature here as part of this live event.
I'm in our customer service portal right now, and I'm not seeing any new questions come through here either.
Okay,
great. And it looks like you're right. The chat, people cannot find the chat button. There is one thing that just came in a second ago from Laura Riggs. We are not seeing the setting. Okay, folks, so there is a button someplace that we have missed. So if you have questions, we still have 20 minutes. So I would say this, Troy and I will stay on and email them to the Permit Center. I am monitoring our email right now as they come in, and I can catch them and read them to you. And actually, here they come, Troy. And there's not a lot.
Okay.
Bluebeam question. This one is, I can't find the chat window. Okay, answered that one.
Neither can we, unfortunately.
Questions in chat. Not possible to add a comment. Okay, actually, so all of the questions are about the chat.
Okay, so this is your opportunity. Yeah, go ahead.
Here we go. Ready, Troy? Yeah, I noticed that the trainer was using a document called CCSF EPR Training Procedure 42921, but the only one I'm able to download on the resources page is an earlier version dated 3/25/21. Can you help me find the updated version?
Yes, we will. We can try to get that updated version. I don't remember. I think I fixed like a tiny thing in here. Like it was like a typo or something I just fixed and I created a new version. So I promise you that this is not dramatically different than the version you might be seeing, even if it's a month or so prior. But I will, Rebecca, make sure that you have the latest version of this so that we all are looking at the same dates here. But I can assure you that all of the information that I've added recently is very, 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 very minor, just little typo fixes and things like that. So.
Okay. Great. So nothing's substantive or no substantive changes in there. Sorry, long day. And that.
But we will get the latest one on there.
Okay, and then let me see. Here we go. Questions, read today's training. Okay, go back. The next question. Mechanical calc used to be incorporated. Now with calc report, do incorporate still required to be incorporated now with report?
Well, what I can say to that is I think they may be asking possibly about the setting anytime there's a reviewer comment, there should be an incorporation of those comments. That may be what this question is about, making sure that there has to be a response, there has to be an incorporation. What I would say is that you're trying to communicate as efficiently as possible back to the reviewer exactly what you've done. So adding things like incorporated, adding things like little replies, little notes that indicate specifically where the incorporation has happened, where the subsequent review has changed, and then finally clouding, adding a cloud around that subsequent submittal that indicates where the changes have happened. That is all still required, but it's not really a workflow change that's any different from the earlier processes of paper or anything else. So if there was a workflow process that was set a certain way, I don't believe that has changed.
Okay, the next question, Troy, is should the last page be labeled?
Ooh, great question. You know, it's not important that the last page is labeled. You can see here, if I look in the bookmarks, I don't know if you guys, if anyone picked it up when I was inserting the page. I would need to get out of here. Is that it creates a label automatically. Let's just really quickly, it's going to be difficult for me to go back that far, unfortunately. Let me try one more time, insert. But the answer is no, it's not required. Let's see. So you can see that it picks up the bookmarks, and you can use the file name as the page label if you wanted. It can pick up those bookmarks, but the reality is the purpose of that last page is only to add in a menu. And so it's not required to be, it's never going to be looked at. It's never going to be considered. So the answer is no, it doesn't require. You can see here, you see here, mine does not have a label. No comment should ever be added to that page. So the really big purpose of why we add labels into the thumbnails, I didn't mention this earlier, why these page labels are here, is because when a reviewer makes a comment, when a review comment is made, you know what page that review comment is on. So really it benefits you guys, the applicants, even more so than it benefits the reviewers. So, you know, let's say that you're subbing out your comments to a bunch of different trades. You're going to be able to see very quickly when the comments are made what trades are involved here, because this doesn't say that the comment was made on page 52. It says that the comment was made on page A2 or G0 or S1 or M1. So having the page labels in place really helps, because when comments are made, you can see exactly what page those comments apply to, and not just page 12 or something like that. Okay, other questions?
Okay, this one, I'm just going to read it out. Hello, I'm trying to understand how submission of my specific building permit application works under the new process, specifically for energy storage systems in San Francisco above 200 kilowatts. I submit OTC with plans permits to SFDBI. I go through electrical, building, non-structural, and fire counters. Fire does not approve the plans OTC and only does intake. In this case, would the whole building permit application go through all counters via Bluebeam, or would it be in-person OTC then submitted to fire through Bluebeam? So we are not doing a bifurcated digital and paper process. So, but this particular type, Francis, I need to confirm. I believe it would start via the email process that Troy is showing us right now, and the DBI permit text would route it accordingly. But I will confirm and follow up to your email inquiry so that you know for certain. But again, I believe this one goes through the standard full EPR process now.
Yeah, and that would be my answer as well, because I believe if a component of it is OTC, then it's outside of the electronic plan review process. And if it's not bifurcated, then it's going to be standard. So it's not going to be, we're not doing OTC using EPR,
Correct.
using electronic plan review right now. So if some component is OTC, then most likely it's going to be outside of that.
I concur. Okay, the next question. Can you go over how the process is different for addenda to site permits?
Okay, sure. Well, I mean, not much is that different, but just note here in the procedure, if I come to the naming convention here, if I can find it here, it kind of covers one thing, which is the, oops, I think I went way too far. Sorry, let me come back to it covers the naming process as part of the appendix. So in the appendix, when we're talking about some of the items, it differentiates the addenda as far as the naming. And then other than that, if you refer to sf.gov, I believe it has somewhere in here, or it has addenda information in here as well. Submit addenda for your site permit. But other than that, I mean, really the reality is you're coming to this place inside of sf.gov as opposed to the regular submission for a DBI. You're coming, you're not coming to a building permit application, you're coming to this location. And really, when you go in here, following the rules to create the PDF set, that's exactly what I showed you. Adding the backcheck page, that's exactly what I showed you. It does get a little bit different because you are applying a little bit, you're submitting addenda information just a little bit, but other than that, your submission process, your review process is going to be really, really similar. I can't think of any really substantial areas where it's going to be just completely different. But just follow along with the information that's provided here in sf.gov for submitting the addenda, and I think you should be in good shape.
Okay, great. The next question, that one. Hold on. Let's see.
I will share the email again for people to post their questions. Again, we're apologies why we don't know why it's not working with the chat, but you can send a question right in here, and one way or another, we're gonna get it answered for you.
Okay, here's a question that I'll take, Troy. So is all OTC still going to be paper? Is old paper submission still available for intake submission? So two questions. So OTC is in person and on paper still. This time we're not working on a process to digitize that. So please continue to follow the OTC process. That information is on sf.gov. And then the second question is paper still available for intake submissions? And the answer is yes. If you cannot work within this process, you are certainly allowed to submit via paper. I would say it will take longer because it's not the primary way of handling intake projects right now. And routing takes days in between departments because the county is still not fully back to work. So just know that the time to move an set of plans between departments will take anywhere between 1 to 3 business days. If you have multiple departments, multiply by that. Where EPR becomes a much better resource for you is because the departments are getting in to the plans at the same time and reviewing and then responding to you. So it is in your best interest to try to do it digitally, but we're happy to work with you on paper. Just please be aware going into it, it will take longer. And once you start on paper, we're going to keep you on paper until the permit is issued. Are all building permit submissions required to be submitted through Bluebeam? Oh, no, we just answered that. So we can do paper if you want to do paper.
Right.
This one's
right. And obviously the initial submission, as I mentioned, goes through sf.gov. The subsequent submissions go into the Bluebeam Studio session. But I think they were asking a different question, but I just want to reiterate that.
Yep. Related question. If we have a project that was submitted electronically during COVID, can we add addendum to the file? For the same project, we made a modification with paper documents, which was approved over the counter. Can we upload scans of the PDFs of the paper document to attach to this project? So So this is a variation of our procedure. I love edge cases. I would say if you did the first permit digitally, yes, you can go do your next addenda digitally. And I will send this email, and Cervantes to CPB and let them know that I just said that out loud, so they're not caught off guard. But I think if your original permit was issued digitally, you can go and pick the process back up digitally. And I think it's a good idea to attach the PDF of your other approved plans that were on paper. Although DBI should have access to those also.
Right. And I mean, it's probably a case-by-case basis on some of those, obviously. So I don't know that what you said was a blanket statement. I'll just add that caveat there.
Yeah, that's true. Like every permit is a special snowflake, I'm finding.
Exactly.
All right, here's one from Bert Martinez. The fonts on my PDFs change from revision to revision, even though I didn't change a thing. Why is that?
That is I don't know if I think they're talking about the fonts of their drawing set, maybe. What I will say, that actually brings up a good point that I sort of wanted to mention, but I didn't. And that is, in some cases, I don't know if you remember back when I was talking about the formatting, I was talking about all the AutoCAD fonts that sometimes populate this markups list. What I will say when it comes to fonts, especially if you're using AutoCAD, is please do the world a favor and stop using SHX fonts inside of AutoCAD. It's going to cause a lot of issues, especially when you're making PDFs out of those. It's going to make it difficult for OCR to read. It's going to cause all of the different little markups that appear. That's all a result of using shape fonts, of SHX fonts inside of AutoCAD. So if your fonts are changing, one of the first things I would look at is making sure that when you're in AutoCAD or when you're even in Revit, that you're using a true type font. If it's not, and use a common true type font, such as like Helvetica or Arial. If you're using anything other than that, you're going to probably be anticipating some issues with fonts going down the road, especially when we're looking at creating a really clean PDF formatted set. So true type fonts, that's the way to go.
Okay, let's see. Let's squeeze in a couple more questions in the last few minutes. For junior site permits approved outside of EPR, will addendum be required for EPR, or can it still be paper? So those should be on paper. The addenda process is really, and I think this is on the website, if you've started digitally, the addenda process is there for you digitally. But if you have been working on paper, the DBI is asking that you remain on paper. And again, it's a case-by-case basis. So if this is an issue for you, please reach out and to the Permit Center email that you sent this question to, and we will work with DBI and review the process again. Let's see. Just did that one. This has making random chapters. Okay, that one. OTC. Okay, OTC. We've answered the OTC question. We've answered that one, and I think we have answered all the questions.
Great. That's great.
So
news.
Everybody who submitted a question, even if we've answered it verbally, I'll send you. You'll still receive a response from our customer service portal, and then I'll gather these questions outside of the system, and we'll post an FAQ along with the video and the revised procedure that we'll try to get updated today or first thing tomorrow.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, everybody, again for attending. Thank you, Troy, from AECOM. We appreciate your help and support of our journey. And Again, if you have any questions, send them our way, but thank you everyone for taking the time out today. It is much appreciated.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.